78% of the 1,400 people who we know have been killed, I mean there may be more, was by firing military rifles, shotguns with pellets. You know, you have seen in the report we have made a very strong plea that shotguns with pellets are forbidden because the injuries that they produce are horrific. And I saw that myself. I went to one of the hospitals in Bangladesh when I visited, and I could talk to some of the survivors, and some of them will be disabled for their lives. And that's especially young people. I mean, some of them were children that I saw. Some of them were young women, young men, and these type of injuries are horrific. And we know that about 12 to 13% of children were affected by this. We had also journalists being killed, at least 6 from what I hear from the report, more than 200 injured. Mass arrests, the climate of fear that you may disappear, that you may not be found again, is extremely traumatic. And that was part of the repressive measures that applied. And again, this tells us the story that we have to bring these situations to light, and we need to put the spotlight on them, especially when we are able to establish the facts, and we need to learn from them, not just for the situation in Bangladesh, but for many other situations around the world where similar systems of repression are working. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner.
I can come in on one of the last questions.
Yes, Ravina Shamdasani, now our spokesperson, and Rory Mongovan, the head of our Asia Pacific section, will continue taking your questions. So Ravina now has a response to one of the questions as well.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. One of the questions was about some of the worst examples, and the High Commissioner, of course, painted a picture of just the scale of the brutality that occurred. The report is unfortunately full of individual examples of the brutality that people were subjected to. Among one of the most harrowing testimonies was that of a young woman in Jatrabari who was holding a wounded protester when a police officer executed him at point-blank range. When she screamed in horror, the officer turned his shotgun on her and fired again, causing severe injuries. And in another case, the security forces shot a young boy in his hand with a shotgun from point-blank range to punish him for throwing stones, and this completely mangled the young boy's hand.
Thank you, Ravina. So we'll go back online. We have a couple of more questions pending. So Israt from DBC, I see you've raised your hand again. Let's see if we can get it working this time. Israt, I see you're unmuted. Okay, maybe there is a problem your end on that. So we have we'll take another 2 questions. So we have a question from Salahuddin Ahmed, and then a question from Mustafa Yusuf.
Thank you for giving me the floor to talk about. I would like to know about police reform and governance issues from Bangladesh. And since enacted, the Police Act of 1861 during British rule, multiple attempts have been made to reform Bangladesh policing system. Given that the police ordinance of 2007 was drafted but never enacted yet, should the interim government prioritize implementing it for meaningful police reform? Do you think so? If it is, please let me know your insights, please.
Thank you. And then the next question. Mustafa?
Hello, everybody. I'm Mustafa Yusuf. I work for the Banner News. It's a US government-funded news portal focusing on South Asia. My question is, could you be specific about the challenges the interim government might face to prosecute the perpetrators of July uprising, of July massacre? Thanks.
Sorry, the line was a bit muffled. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Could you be specific about the challenges the interim government might face to prosecute the perpetrators of the July massacre? Thank you.
I'll pass over to Rory Mongovan, the head of the Asia Pacific section.
Thank you very much for the questions. And first on the police reform, which is really a key piece to this moving forward. And not just police reform, but reform to the security sector as a whole, because in Bangladesh, of course, one of the problems has been the militarization of policing and the addition of different forces, Rapid Action Battalion, Border Guards, ANSAR, other forces operating under military command or under the direction of the Prime Minister and senior executive. So this breakdown of independent policing, politicization of policing, has really been one of the significant root causes identified in our report. I mean, we really recommend a reform, very far-reaching overhaul of the whole security sector. There needs to be a change of approach in managing public order, not relying on these old colonial powers, and emphasising less lethal forms of policing that de-escalate situations rather than lead to these confrontations. As High Commissioner said, there needs to be a prohibition on the use of shotguns with pellets and military weapons in policing public order. The policing system needs to be demilitarized. We recommend the disbandment of the Rapid Action Battalion, which has been responsible for violations not only during this period, but for many years in Bangladesh. And looking ahead, the establishment of a National Police Commission and independent bodies that could ensure accountability over the police, the border guards and other forces. We're very pleased that the government has appointed a reform commission on police, and we have seen that many of the recommendations that we are making align with what is coming through the Reform Commission. So we hope that this is one area where there can be substantial change, substantial progress. On the challenges to prosecuting people, I think we know that while the government has changed with the appointment of the interim government, the system has not necessarily changed, and many officials and people who had served or been appointed under the previous regime continue to function and often be needed across the different ministries. And this, of course, creates a kind of a potential conflict of interest, of obstruction to the reforms or to the accountability process moving forward. When you have a police force that's not yet reformed, responsible for investigating violations committed by police, obviously you have a major challenge. When you look at the courts, of course, the politicisation extended into the judiciary, many judicial appointments. The former government had compromised the independence of the judiciary. And the capacities of the key elements needed for accountability process. Of course, Bangladesh is significant, has its own international crimes tribunal, but of course the investigator prosecution capacity in the court, remains quite limited. We had an enormous challenge as an office to undertake this fact-finding over several months. We know the challenge that they are also facing as investigators in trying to pursue these cases. So I think there are many, institutional and capacity challenges for the justice sector in moving forward. As High Commissioner said, the office is really ready to support in this. And of course, Bangladesh can also look outwards to some of these other possibilities of international support from the International Criminal Court.
Actually, if I can just supplement what Rory has said, concerns do remain. That is clear, as the High Commissioner pointed out, and as Rory pointed out, transitions are fragile, and there are still a lot of concerns about the current situation in Bangladesh, particularly with regard to due process and fair trial in the many cases that have been filed, custodial debts in the unreformed prison system, actions taken against journalists, and persistent incidents as well of mob violence, including attacks on minorities. In terms of recommendations, the report contains a very comprehensive set of recommendations on institutional reform, law reform. One key recommendation is to take urgent measures to establish a victim and witness protection program that is independent of the existing security forces, and to initiate strict disciplinary measures and criminal investigations in cases of witness intimidation, because this is something we have witnessed quite a lot in Bangladesh.
Thank you, Ravina. We've actually got a question online. It's from Boris Engelson. He says, Bangladesh has been the place of a rampant civil war for more than half a century. What did or could so far the UN do to monitor the risks thereof and try to avoid this second or third or fourth bloodshed since the early 70s? And then we have two other questions on the line. If we could go first to Zima Islam and then M.A.K. Zilani.
Thank you so much. This is Zaima, and I work at the Daily Star. So my question is, did this very comprehensive investigation identify some of the perpetrators by name, and would the Commission be sharing some of these names with the judicial processes in Bangladesh as they try to bring the perpetrators to book, specifically seeing that Bangladesh still has the death penalty?
M.A.K. Zilani? I see you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you. This is M.A.K. Zilani from Bangladesh, working for the Daily Shomoy Alo. My question is, what is the root causes of incident that occurred on July, August? And what type of instrument, basically military instrument, are used in that incident? And have any sniper uses or like this type? Please, what is your findings? Thank you.
Thank you. Rory?
Thank you very much. Just the first question. I mean, we wouldn't characterise the situation in Bangladesh as having been in civil war, but I think perhaps what you're reflecting is that Bangladesh has been caught in this trap of very binary politics, a kind of winner-takes-all politics that has really led to a very deep polarisation in the country, and the capture of state institutions by government in power, and the weaponisation of the law and the state, often against the people. That has in turn also kind of created an enabling environment for corruption and the co-option of the economy for private interests and patronage. So I think all of these elements come together and have held the country hostage in many ways over many years. And I think as the High Commissioner said, but more importantly as the students have said, as Chief Advisor has said, this is an opportunity, historic opportunity, to break that cycle. And to break that cycle, to change the form of politics, governance, economy in Bangladesh, really requires this comprehensive acknowledgement of the past, reform, of laws and institutions and of the system of governance, recreation of a civil society and civic space, but also democracy, even democracy within parties, to really cultivate a new democracy in Bangladesh. And I think this is a moment, historic moment, that the students have brought for the country. And I think the High Commissioner's offering our full support to realising that vision. The report doesn't identify perpetrators as such. I mean, of course, there are senior officials named in the report, different moments, different meetings. As High Commissioner said, this is a human rights investigation, not an individual criminal investigation. Of course, we have retained huge amount of material and evidence from this work. It's being very carefully archived and kept according to the highest standards, so that it could be used in a future accountability process. And yes, on your question about cooperating with judicial processes going forward, this really depends on two or three things. One, of course, the consent of victims and of the people who've given us information to share that information, their protection, that it's safe to do so, that they won't face some reprisal. Secondly, that the process must be credible, fair, must meet the international standards of fair trial. And thirdly, as you rightly said, the issue of the death penalty is a problem for us. We oppose the death penalty in all circumstances, and as a UN policy, we're constrained from cooperating with processes, with trials that can result in the death penalty. So this is a constraint. The interim government is aware of that. We hope that this whole process will lead to some reflection, debate, reconsideration of the death penalty in Bangladesh, which we think is actually part of this cycle of revenge. And root causes, look, so many issues identified in the report. I mean, of course, the protests themselves came out of this student protest over the reintroduction of a quota system of employment for government jobs that favoured families and descendants of the ruling party. But it reflected much broader grievances that had become very pent up in the society over a long time. And I think these relate back to some of the things I said about the nature of politics, the high levels of corruption at high level, but also at a day-to-day level, the lack of opportunity, of employment, jobs. This is a country that's moving towards middle income. You have a fantastic young generation coming through universities with all sorts of new skills, and without necessarily the opportunities for employment. The suffocation of a lot of small, medium enterprise by this whole oligarchic approach to the economy. And also, I think, the fact that these restrictive laws, the controls on social media, the suppression of independent journalism, all of this had built up really, I think, to a point of explosion. I think when we visited Bangladesh, even in 2022 with the former High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, you could feel this tension building in the society. Of course, the elections in January of 2024 were very polarised and took place in an environment of suppression. And so I think all of these ingredients really were the fuel to which the student protest sort of ignited. And I think this is signified as well in how after the 17th, 18th of July, the protest broadened from the students to a much more mass movement that was reflective really of all sectors of the society and all of the different socioeconomic groups. In terms of weapons, I mean, we have quite a bit of information in the report, and I encourage you to look at it closely. And High Commissioner gave you a few of the the statistics there, which were striking. 78% of the fatalities were caused by firing, and of that, 66% were caused by military rifles and 12% by shotguns with pellets. So that's about, close to 80%. And the things we find, you'll see in the research, is not only the weapons that were used, but how they were used. So this pattern of, for instance, firing obviously indiscriminately into crowds, but also firing above the torso, and often at angles that were designed to hit the protesters rather than to disperse the protesters. And of course, as Ravina mentioned, there's some horrible examples as well of protesters or bystanders being killed, at very, very short range with very high-powered weapons. So I think you will see there, this prevalence use of military-grade weaponry was a key factor in the high level of fatalities that were recorded.
Ravina, something to
I'll
add?
just add to that. The question on root causes was, of course, very important, a key question. And in fact, this was part of what the interim government mandated our office to look into specifically on the root causes that led to these terrible incidents in July and August. The report is very long and detailed. It contains a lot of rich, in-depth information about this. And if you go to page 69, you'll see, that the root causes set out in a very systematic manner. And what you will find is, of course, that the root causes run deep. So the reform that needs to take place will also need to be profound.
Thank you. We've got two more questions online, and then we're nearly hit the hour mark on the press conference. So I think these will be our final two questions. So we'll start with Mustafizir, followed by Takuya. Mustafizir. I see you're still muted.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Mustafiz from New Age. I'd like to know how could the UN system help Bangladesh government, at present the interim government, to bring back those who held key positions during the July massacre, including the Prime Minister, and many of them at the time fled to other countries and taking shelter there, including India. How could the UN system help Bangladesh to bring back those? And do you think UN position on death sentence could stand as a barrier to getting your support in the trial process or investigation process? Thank you.
And a question from Takuya.
Hi, could you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for taking my question. And I'm sorry, I was not allowed to get access to Zoom at the beginning, so someone might have asked already, but regarding former Prime Minister herself, are you going to ask India about her whereabouts? Because she reportedly, went to India first. So are you going to ask India? And do you think you have to interview with her, or just it's out of scope? Thank you.
Thank you, Takuya. There's a similar question. I'll just share one more question online, is concerning what they say, the trial process of Sheikh Hasina. How will it proceed? And the question, similar to what Takuya is asking, is why is India not handing over to Bangladesh? The interim government says that a formal request has been made to bring her back. Is there any opportunities for the UN to play a role in this matter? Rory?
Thank you for the two questions. I mean, I think kind of relate together to this question of Sheikh Hasina and her extradition. Look, the bottom line is that all those responsible for what happened and what amount to very serious human rights violations and possibly international crimes are held accountable. And the report shows that there are different avenues through which justice can be pursued, both in Bangladesh and internationally. The issue of extradition is really a bilateral process, but we hope that states will cooperate and support each other towards this goal of accountability, whether that's India or other states where people may take refuge. There are other ways that states can cooperate and support Bangladesh as well. For instance, investigating corruption and tracing, assets and ill-gotten or stolen funds. So, the important thing is cooperation first, and secondly, that any extradition or trial process respects due process and international standards of fair trial. The specific point of the death penalty was raised. Yes, for the UN, it is a constraint for us to cooperate in proceedings that can result in the death penalty. But not just for the United Nations. I think for many member states have this concern, and it would be a factor that they would also have to weigh in relation to their support to the process or the question of extradition. So I think this is really, needs to be seen in this broad principle, really, that accountability must move forward, and states have to find ways to work together to achieve that.
Okay, I think that will draw the press conference to an end here. I see there are some more questions both in the chat room and online. Feel free to reach out to our office. We've got Ravina here and Rory who can assist you if you send us an email. Just also to let you know, the report is online, as is the press release, so you can get information from that. There is also an infographic which you will find, I'm sure, very useful, and we will be sending out broadcast quality video as well. Okay, thank you very much everyone. Have a pleasant day.